Joe Wentz Project Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the Joe Wentz Project Podcast. Hope you're doing well today. And this time should be a better go-around as far as the audio goes. Oh, yeah. It's a beautiful day outside. Beautiful. It is Wednesday, April 26, 2017. Yes, absolutely. But today, as you could probably tell in the title of this podcast, I was wanting to talk about a man by the name of Don Felder. If you're not familiar with Don Felder, he is the guitar player for the Eagles, or should I say former guitar player. He is best known for writing Hotel California. That is his claim to fame. Don Felder, amazing guitar player, amazing musician, and I have his book, Heaven and Hell, My Life with the Eagles by Don Felder. If you haven't read that, check it out or get the audio book. It is fantastic. Great book. It goes into detail what happened when he was dismissed from the Eagles and all that stuff. It goes into detail when he got into the Eagles. And what's very interesting is Bernie Ledden was the first original guitar player of the Eagles. And Don Felder and Bernie Ledden hung out a lot when they were a little bit younger. Not kids, but when they got a little older, they hung out a lot. So Bernie Ledden left Florida, which that's where Don Felder was from as well. And he went to California, and that's how he hooked up with the Eagles. And over time, Don Felder was doing some work here and there. He's actually playing for, did a little bit of work for, Crosby, Stills, Nash or something of that effect. I can't be 100% sure, but he was doing some stuff with, I think it was it Graham Nash, I believe he was doing something with, being his guitar player. And, he was doing that for a while, and Bernie Ledden called Don Felder and said, "Look, man, you need to come out to California. This is where it's at." So, of course, Don Felder was married, and they had a little baby at the time, a little daughter, I believe, and so he, packed his stuff with a U-Haul, and him and his wife went to California, met up with Bernie Ledden at his place. And so Don Felder started looking for work, while playing guitar and stuff as well in the area. So one thing leads to another. And Bernie Ledden asked Don Felder if he'd like to come to one of the Eagles shows and hang out backstage. Don Felder said, sure, why not? So Don Felder and his wife, they go to the show. They get backstage, and Bernie Ledden introduces Don Felder to the other guys in the band. Of course, that would be Randy Meisner, Glenn Frey, Don Henley. And so they have a little jam. And Don Felder does some slide work as well, some slide guitar playing, I should say, while they're goofing around. And this caught the attention of Glenn Frey. Glenn Frey really liked his guitar playing. And so a day or two later, Don Felder gets a phone call from none other than Glenn Frey, and Glenn asks him if he can come to the studio and put some slide guitar work on one of their songs in the studio. Don Felder says, sure, why not? He goes and does that, comes back. About another day or two later, Glenn Frey calls Don Felder and says, hey, would you like to join the Eagles? Don Felder couldn't believe it. That's how he got into the group with the Eagles. And he said, of course, in the beginning, man, everything was great. Everything was fine. And then a little bit over time, he could see a lot of strain and stress within the group. Bernie Ledden and Glenn Frey were really having issues. From what I understand in the book, now this is just, Don Felder's perspective from his viewpoint. But Glenn Frey could be hard to be around at times. And, God rest his soul. I know he passed away not too long ago. But I guess he would kind of throw his weight around a little bit here and there, and Bernie Ledden didn't like that. And they were starting to go in more of a kind of a rock direction, and Bernie Ledden was more of a country bluegrass guitar player. He didn't want to do no rock. And so this went on for a while, and then I guess it was in a what was it, a hotel room one day after a show or before a show or something. Glenn Frey and Bernie Ledden had some words, and Bernie Ledden had been training in martial arts at the time, working out, running, lifting weights and all that stuff, somebody you really wouldn't want to tangle with. Well, Glenn Frey said some kind of smart-ass remark of something, I can't remember. Bernie Ledden had opened a beer and poured it over Glenn Frey's head, and was just really just egging him on, like, hey, come on, get a piece of me, big boy, if you want it. Something to that effect, Well, Glenn Frey didn't say nothing. He just sat there. He took a towel and dried himself off, and it wasn't long after that, Bernie Ledden quit. He left. They were supposed to, they were actually in the studio working on a song. They had been in there for quite some time, and they were asking everybody's opinions about the song, which is something they never really did before. Glenn Frey and Don Henley were always like the two leaders of that group, and they really didn't ask the other band members what they thought about a song. They just said, okay, this is good enough, this is how it's going to be. They didn't ask the other guys' opinions or anything. So, but this one particular time they did. Bernie Ledden stood up and said something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, of course, here, you never asked me my opinion before, so what does it matter now? And he said, I'm going surfing, and he just walked out, and he never came back, So, but one thing they did when Don Felder first got into the group, their manager made them turn the Eagles into like a corporation, like a company, and they all had equal shares, and and that only happened with the original members. So Bernie Ledden quits, he leaves, and so now you just have Don Felder on guitar, and then that's when they brought in Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh was popular at that time. They were kind of leery about it because he was known as a wild man, as far as that in that in that time frame for back then. But they got him in there, but they didn't put him in the corporation. They just kind of hired him as just a regular band member, which I thought was very interesting. I was like, wow. So, time goes by, they're touring, and by this time they're starting to get hugely successful with the album Hotel California. And so Don Felder is, he said, man, when I first got on the road with those guys, I didn't do anything. I didn't do any blow. I didn't drink. I went straight to my hotel room. The other guys were partying. He said, but that only lasted so long. He said, because the amount of women that were always at every show was just unbelievable. And he said he fell into the hands of temptation. And, he said he couldn't help it, is what he said. So they're doing the tour, everything goes great, and every once in a while Don Felder would go home, and that's back in the day when you would get fan mail. It would be delivered to the, to the record company or the office or whatever, and then they would send it out to the individual band members, And Don Felder always got a huge amount of fan mail. And one day, he was on the way back home from running an errand or something. He got home and his wife was sitting on the couch, and she looked very upset. And Don Felder couldn't figure out why. Well, he got a letter from a woman that he had, I guess, like a one-night stand with or something. And she went into great detail about their night together. And, of course, this really upset Don Felder's wife. Well, that really, started driving a nail in between them. They went to counseling. He apologized and all that stuff. But I think by that time the damage was done. So they started to go to counseling and stuff like that. Things were never the same after that. They stayed together for a long time, but it just never, she couldn't get over that, which, who could? That's pretty rough, So some more time goes by, and then Don Felder and Glenn Frey started having some stress and strain with their musical relationship. So I think it was in 1980, and there's clips of this on YouTube. There's actually actual audio of this event on YouTube, and it's also in the Eagles documentary as well. See, Don Felder said something. He presented a couple of songs to the band, and he was wanting to sing on one of the songs, and they told him he could. And when he went out to get some lunch and come back to the studio, Don Henley had already laid the vocals down. So this upset Don Felder greatly. And so, stuff like this was going on. So the part that I'm talking about that's actually on YouTube, if you just go on YouTube and put Glenn Frey and Don Felder argue or something like that, you can hear them right there in between songs going at it with each other, and Glenn Frey says, "I can't wait till this show's over, as I'm going to kick your ass," and all this stuff. And Don Felder's like, "Good, come and get it." And I was like, "Good Lord." And so the end of the show comes around, and Don Felder grabs an acoustic and goes in the parking garage and just smashes it against a concrete column, destroys the guitar. And Glenn Frey said some kind of smart remark or something. So Don Felder got in his limo and left, and Glenn Frey, I've seen pictures of this, is standing there flipping off the limo while Don Felder drove off. So I don't know if Don Felder just said, "Screw it, I'm not getting in a physical confrontation," or if he chickened out. I don't know. I have no idea. But that was the end of the Eagles in 1980, and that was why you didn't hear from them for years and years and years. And, of course, in the 90s, the Hell Freezes Over tour came about, and they did all that. Hugely successful tour. It was awesome. And then they got done with all that. Some more things had come up about money between Glenn Frey and Don Felder, and, Don Felder would... They all, of course, had the same manager, and the manager was kind of siding with Glenn Frey and Don Henley, and he would kind of tell Don Felder some other things, I guess, just to, try to keep him calm down or try to take his mind off of it. Well, that didn't work with Don. Don knew some stuff wasn't right. So about a week or so later, he gets a phone call, and guess who it's from? It's from Glenn Frey. And Glenn Frey says, "If I ever get another letter from your attorney about anything with this business, with this band, I'm gonna F you up or something like that. You're fired, and that's it." And Don Felder said, "Look, Glenn, don't fire me, man. This is all I know. I don't have nothing else." And Glenn just hung up. So Don Felder tried to talk to the manager of the group and all that, but nothing worked. They had their mind made up that he was out. So Don Felder eventually had the last laugh. Because if you remember in the beginning of this story, I told you they all signed an agreement, a contract, that the Eagles was like a corporation. And Don Felder says in his book that you can't just, fire somebody like that without some kind of negotiation or some kind of settlement or something. So he went to his attorney and filed all this legal paperwork, and it was a bunch of bad stuff going on. It really separated Don Felder from the band. So they tried to offer Don Felder a settlement to buy him out, and he would be out of the Eagles Corporation, so to speak, and everything else. And Don Felder was smart. He said, "No, I'm not doing that." So they settled, where he's still officially a corporation or business member of the Eagles, so he still gets paid big money every time. Well, of course, the Eagles now aren't doing anything because Glenn Frey passed away, but any time they were touring or doing stuff, he was still getting paid big money. And he actually does an interview on Howard Stern. If you look that up on YouTube, just put Don Felder on Howard Stern, and they kind of talk about that too. So I think at the time, that's when Don Felder was promoting his book. And it's a very, interesting story. Don Felder, man, very nice guy, man. Very laid-back guy. He's, I think right now he's doing some summer dates with like Rick Springfield and Styx, and I like it how those guys stick together as far as that genre of music is concerned, because that's you don't really hear good music like that anymore, not in my opinion anyway. So there you go. There's my little take about Don Felder and the Eagles. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to check the links below for my t-shirts and hoodies and other apparel, and check me out at thejoewentzproject.com for more information about me if you would like to do so. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Until next time, this is Joe for the Joe Wentz Project. Have a good day. Goodbye.
The Joe Wentz Project Podcast.